Section 4 of The Essence of Christianity by Ludwig Feuerbach. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Essence of Christianity by Ludwig Feuerbach. Translated from the German by Marian Evans. Chapter 1, Introduction, Section 2, Part 2, The Essence of Religion Considered Generally. In order to banish from the mind the identity of the divine and human predicates, and the consequent identity of the divine and human nature, recourse is had to the idea that God, as the absolute real being, has an infinite fullness of various predicates, of which we here know only a part, and those such as are analogous to our own, while the rest, by virtue of which God must thus have quite a different nature from the human, or that which is analogous to human, we shall only know in the future, that is, after death. But an infinite plenitude or multitude of predicates which are really different, so different that one does not immediately involve the other, is realized only in an infinite plenitude or multitude of different beings or individuals. Thus the human nature presents an infinite abundance of different predicates, and for that very reason it presents an infinite abundance of different individuals. Each new man is a new predicate, a new phasis of humanity. As many as are the men, so many are the powers, the properties of humanity. It is true that there are the same elements in every individual, but under such various conditions and modifications that they appear new and peculiar. The mystery of the inexhaustible fullness of the divine predicates is therefore nothing else than the mystery of human nature, considered as an infinitely varied, infinitely modifiable, but consequently phenomenal being. Only in the realm of the senses, only in space and time, does there exist a being of really infinite qualities or predicates. Where there are really different predicates, there are different times. One man is a distinguished musician, a distinguished author, a distinguished physician, but he cannot compose music, write books, and perform cures in the same moment of time. Time, and not the Hegelian dialectic, is the medium of uniting opposites, contradictories in one and the same subject. But distinguished and detached from the nature of man, and combined with the idea of God, the infinite fullness of various predicates is a conception without reality, a mere fantasy, a conception derived from the sensible world, but without the essential conditions, without the truth of sensible existence, a conception which stands in direct contradiction with the divine being, considered as a spiritual, i.e., an abstract, simple, single being. For the predicates of God are precisely of this character, that one involves all the others, because there is no real difference between them. If, therefore, in the present predicates I have not the future, in the present God, not the future God, then the future God is not the present, but they are two distinct beings. But this distinction is in contradiction with the unity and simplicity of the theological God. Why is a given predicate a predicate of God? Because it is divine in its nature, i.e., because it expresses no limitation, no defect. Why are there other predicates applied to him? Because, however various in themselves, they agree in this, that they all alike express perfection, unlimitedness. Hence I can conceive innumerable predicates of God, because they must all agree with the abstract idea of the Godhead, and must have in common that which constitutes every single predicate, a divine attribute. Thus it is in the system of Spinoza. He speaks of an infinite number of attributes of the divine substance, but he specifies none except thought and extension. Why? because it is a matter of indifference to know them, nay, because they are in themselves indifferent, superfluous. For with all these innumerable predicates, I yet always mean to say the same thing, as when I speak of thought and extension. Why is thought an attribute of substance? Because, according to Spinoza, it is capable of being conceived by itself, because it expresses something indivisible, perfect, infinite. Why extension or matter? For the same reason. Thus, substance can have an indefinite number of predicates, because it is not their specific definition, their difference, but their identity, their equivalence, which makes them attributes of substance. Or rather, substance has innumerable predicates only because, how strange, it has properly no predicate. That is, no definite real predicate. The indefinite unity, which is the product of thought, completes itself by the indefinite multiplicity, which is the product of the imagination. Because the predicate is not multum, it is multa. In truth, the positive predicates are thought and extension. In these two infinitely more is said than in the nameless innumerable predicates, for they express something definite. In them I have something, but substance is too indifferent, too apathetic to be something. That is, to have qualities and passions, that it may not be something, it is rather nothing. Now, when it is shown that what the subject is lies entirely in the attributes of the subject, that is, that the predicate is the true subject, it is also proved that if the divine predicates are attributes of the human nature, the subject of those predicates is also of the human nature. But the divine predicates are partly general, partly personal. The general predicates are the metaphysical, but these serve only as external points of support to religion. They are not the characteristic definitions of religion. It is the personal predicates alone which constitute the essence of religion, in which the divine being is the object of religion. Such are, for example, that God is a person, that he is the moral lawgiver, the Father of mankind, the Holy One, the just, the good, the merciful. It is, however, at once clear, or it will at least be clear in the sequel, with regard to these and other definitions, that, especially as applied to a personality, they are purely human definitions, and that consequently man in religion, in his relation to God, is in relation to his own nature. For to the religious sentiment, these predicates are not mere conceptions, mere images which man forms of God, to be distinguished from that which God is in himself, but truths, facts, realities. Religion knows nothing of anthropomorphisms. To it, they are not anthropomorphisms. It is the very essence of religion that to it these definitions express the nature of God. They are pronounced to be images only by the understanding, which reflects on religion, and which, while defending them, yet before its own tribunal denies them. But to the religious sentiment, God is a real Father, real love and mercy. For to it he is a real, living, personal being, and therefore his attributes are also living and personal. Nay, the definitions which are the most sufficing to the religious sentiment are precisely those which give the most offence to the understanding, and which, in the process of reflection on religion, it denies. Religion is essentially emotion. Hence, objectively also, emotion is to it necessarily of a divine nature. Even anger appears to it an emotion not unworthy of God, provided only there be a religious motive at the foundation of this anger. But here it is also essential to observe, and this phenomenon is an extremely remarkable one,
characterizing the very core of religion, that in proportion as a divine subject is in reality human, the greater is the apparent difference between God and man. That is, the more, by reflection on religion, by theology, is the identity of the divine and human denied, and the human, considered as such, is depreciated. The reason of this is, that as what is positive in the conception of the divine being can only be human, the conception of man as an object of consciousness can only be negative. To enrich God, man must become poor. That God may be all, man must become nothing. But he desires to be nothing in himself, because what he takes from himself is not lost to him, since it is preserved in God. Man has his being in God. Why then should he have it in himself? Where is the necessity of postulating the same thing twice, of having it twice? What man withdraws from himself, what he renounces in himself, he only enjoys in an incomparably higher and fuller measure in God. The monks made a vow of chastity to God. They mortified the sexual passion in themselves. But therefore they had in heaven, in the Virgin Mary, the image of woman, an image of love. They could the more easily dispense with real woman, in proportion as an ideal woman was an object of love to them. The greater the importance they attached to the denial of sensuality, the greater the importance of the heavenly Virgin for them. She was to them in the place of Christ, in the stead of God. The more the sensual tendencies are renounced, the more sensual is the God to whom they are sacrificed. For whatever is made an offering to God has an especial value attached to it. In it, God is supposed to have a special pleasure. That which is the highest in the estimation of man is naturally the highest in the estimation of his God. What pleases man pleases God also. The Hebrews did not offer to Jehovah unclean, ill-conditioned animals. On the contrary, those which they most highly prized, which they themselves ate, were also the food of God. Wherever, therefore, the denial of the sensual delights is made a special offering, a sacrifice well pleasing to God, there the highest value is attached to the senses, and the sensuality which has been renounced is unconsciously restored, in the fact that God takes the place of the material delights which have been renounced. The nun weds herself to God. She has a heavenly bridegroom, the monk a heavenly bride. But the heavenly Virgin is only a sensible presentation of a general truth having relation to the essence of religion. Man denies as to himself only what he attributes to God. Religion abstracts from man, from the world, but it can only abstract from the limitations, from the phenomena, in short, from the negative, not from the essence, the positive of the world and humanity. Hence, in the very abstraction and negation, it must recover that from which it abstracts, or believes itself to abstract. And thus, in reality, whatever religion consciously denies, always supposing that what is denied by it is something essential, true, and consequently incapable of being ultimately denied, it unconsciously restores in God. Thus in religion, man denies his reason. Of himself he knows nothing of God. His thoughts are only worldly, earthly. He can only believe what God reveals to him. But on this account, the thoughts of God are human, earthly thoughts. Like man, he has plans in his mind. He accommodates himself to circumstances and grades of intelligence. Like a tutor with his pupils, he calculates closely the effect of his gifts and revelations. He observes man in all his doings. He knows all things, even the most earthly, the commonest, the most trivial. In brief, man, in relation to God, denies his own knowledge, his own thoughts, that he may place them in God. Man gives up his personality, but in return, God, the Almighty, infinite, unlimited being, is a person. He denies human dignity, the human ego, but in return, God is to him a selfish, egotistical being who in all things seeks only himself, his own honor, his own ends. He represents God as simply seeking the satisfaction of his own selfishness, while yet he frowns on that of every other being. His God is the very luxury of egoism. Religion further denies goodness as a quality of human nature. Man is wicked, corrupt, incapable of good. But on the other hand, God is only good, the good being. Man's nature demands as an object goodness personified as God. But is it not hereby declared that goodness is an essential tendency of man? If my heart is wicked, my understanding perverted, how can I perceive and feel the holy to be holy, the good to be good? Could I perceive the beauty of a fine picture if my mind was aesthetically an absolute piece of perversion? Though I may not be a painter, though I may not have the power of producing what is beautiful in myself, I must yet have aesthetic feeling, aesthetic comprehension, since I perceive the beauty that is presented to me externally. Either goodness does not exist at all for man, or, if it does exist, therein is revealed to the individual man the holiness and goodness of human nature. That which is absolutely opposed to my nature, to which I am united by no bond of sympathy, is not even conceivable or perceptible by me. The holy is in opposition to me only as regards the modifications of my personality, but as regards my fundamental nature, it is in unity with me. The holy is a reproach to my sinfulness. In it I recognize myself as sinner. But in so doing, while I blame myself, I acknowledge what I am not, but ought to be, and what, for that very reason, I, according to my destination, can be. For an ought, which has no corresponding capability, does not affect me, is a ludicrous chimera, without any true relation to my mental constitution. But when I acknowledge goodness as my destination, as my law, I acknowledge it, whether consciously or unconsciously, as my own nature. Another nature than my own, one different in quality, cannot touch me. I can perceive sin as sin only when I perceive it to be a contradiction of myself with myself, that is, of my personality with my fundamental nature. As a contradiction of the absolute, considered as another being, the feeling of sin is inexplicable, unmeaning. The distinction between Augustinianism and Pelagianism consists only in this, that the former expresses after the manner of religion what the latter expresses after the manner of rationalism. Both say the same thing, both vindicate the goodness of man, but Pelagianism does it directly, in a rationalistic and moral form. Augustinianism indirectly, in a mystical, that is, a religious form. For that which is given to man's God is in truth given to man himself. What a man declares concerning God, he in truth declares concerning himself. Augustinianism would be a truth, and a truth opposed to Pelagianism, only if man had the devil for his God, and, with the consciousness that he was the devil, honored, reverenced, and worshipped him as the highest being. But so long as man adores a good being as his God, so long does he contemplate in God the goodness of his own nature. As with the doctrine of the radical corruption of human nature, so is it with the identical doctrine that man can do nothing good, i.e., in truth, nothing of himself by his own strength. For the denial of human strength and spontaneous moral activity to be true, the moral activity of God must also be denied. And we must say, with the Oriental nihilist or pantheist, the divine being is absolutely without will or action, indifferent, knowing nothing of the discrimination between evil and good. But he who defines God as an active being, and not only so, but as morally active and morally critical, as a being who loves, works, and rewards good, punishes, rejects, and condemns evil, he who thus defines God only in appearance denies human activity, in fact, making it the highest, the most real activity. He who makes God act humanely declares human activity to be divine. He says, a God who is not active and not morally or humanly active is no God. And thus he makes the idea of the Godhead dependent on the idea of activity, that is, of human activity. For a higher he knows not. Man, this is the mystery of religion, projects his being into objectivity, and then again makes himself an object to this projected image of himself, thus converted into a subject. He thinks of himself as an object to himself, but as the object of an object, of another being than himself. Thus here, man is an object to God. That man is good or evil is not indifferent to God. No, he has a lively, profound interest in man's being good. He wills that man should be good, happy, for without goodness there is no happiness. Thus the religious man virtually retracts the nothingness of human activity by making his dispositions and actions an object to God, by making man the end of God. For that which is an object to the mind is an end in action, by making the divine activity a means of human salvation. God acts that man may be good and happy. Thus man, while he is apparently humiliated to the lowest degree, is in truth exalted to the highest. Thus, in and through God, man has in view himself alone. It is true that man places the aim of his action in God, but God has no other aim of action than the moral and eternal salvation of man. Thus man has in fact no other aim than himself. The divine activity is not distinct from the human. How could the divine activity work on me as its object, nay, work in me, if it were essentially different from me? How could it have a human aim, the aim of ameliorating and blessing man, if it were not itself human? Does not the purpose determine the nature of the act? When man makes his moral improvement an aim to himself, he has divine resolutions, divine projects, but also when God seeks the salvation of man, he has human ends and a human mode of activity corresponding to these ends. Thus in God, man has only his own activity as an object. But for the very reason that he regards his own activity as objective, goodness only as an object, he necessarily receives the impulse, the motive, not from himself, but from this object. He contemplates his nature as external to himself, and this nature as goodness. Thus it is self-evident. It is mere tautology to say that the impulse to good comes only from thence where he places the good. God is the highest subjectivity of man, abstracted from himself. Hence man can do nothing of himself. All goodness comes from God. The more subjective God is, the more completely does man divest himself of his subjectivity, because God is, per se, his relinquished self, the possession of which he, however, again vindicates to himself. As the action of the arteries drives the blood into the extremities, and the action of the veins brings it back again, as life in general consists in perpetual systole and diastole, so it is in religion. In the religious systole, man propels his own nature from himself. He throws himself outward. In the religious diastole, he receives the rejected nature into his heart again. God alone is the being who acts of himself. This is the force of repulsion in religion. God is the being who acts in me, with me, through me, upon me, for me, is the principle of my salvation, of my good dispositions and actions, consequently my own good principle and nature. This is the force of attraction in religion. The course of religious developments, which has been generally indicated, consists specifically in this, that man abstracts more and more from God, and attributes more and more to himself. This is especially apparent in the belief in revelation. That which to a later age or a cultured people is given by nature or reason is to an earlier age or to a yet uncultured people given by God. Every tendency of man, however natural, even the impulse to cleanliness, was conceived by the Israelites as a positive divine ordinance. From this example, we again see that God is lowered, is conceived more entirely on the type of ordinary humanity, in proportion as man detracts from himself. How can the self-humiliation of man go further than when he disclaims the capability of fulfilling spontaneously the requirements of common decency? The Christian religion, on the other hand, distinguished the impulses and passions of man according to their quality, their character. It represented only good emotions, good dispositions, good thoughts, as revelations, operations, that is, as dispositions, feelings, thoughts of God. For what God reveals is a quality of God himself. That of which the heart is full overflows the lips. As is the effect, such is the cause. As the revelation, such the being who reveals himself. A God who reveals himself in good disposition is a God whose essential attribute is only moral perfection. The Christian religion distinguishes inward moral purity from external physical purity. The Israelites identified the two. In relation to the Israelitish religion, the Christian religion is one of criticism and freedom. The Israelite trusted himself to do nothing except what was commanded by God. He was without will even in external things. The authority of religion extended itself even to his food. The Christian religion, on the other hand, in all these external things, made man dependent on himself, i.e., placed in man what the Israelite placed out of himself, in God. Israel is the most complete presentation of positivism in religion. In relation to the Israelite, the Christian is an esprit fort, a free thinker. Thus do things change. What yesterday was still religion is no longer such today. And what today is atheism, tomorrow will be religion. End of section 4.